You done now?
Hi, everybody. This is Bob Gale, co-creator of Back to the Future, and you're listening to Brad Gilmore.
Doc! Okay, relax, Doc. It's me. It's Martin.
No, it can't be. Just sent you back to the future.
Yeah. Oh, I know you did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Great.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
Whoa, this is heavy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast, the only podcast looking back in time at the greatest film trilogy of all time, Back to the Future. I'm your friend in time, Brad Gilmore, and today on the show, we are going to be talking to Allison Robicelli. Allison Robicelli is the woman, the brain behind the Hill Valley Cookbook, the official Hill Valley Cookbook that came out, I think back in 2020 is when the book came out. And I will be honest with you, Allison and I, from the time the book was about to come out or around when it came out, we were on the phone with each other through Facebook. I was texting her, emailing. We were trying to set this up. And then, you know, life happens. As Jeff Goldblum said in the movie, life finds a way to get in the middle of everything. So we didn't have the opportunity to do the podcast back in 2020. And then for season 8, I was trying to do it. And things just kept coming up. And then finally, I told her, look, let's do it. And we had a date, and we were both excited about it. And then that date came, and and something didn't work out. I think I got COVID. I think that's what happened. I think I got COVID. Which I'm fine, by the way, if you're wondering. But this is my second bout with COVID, but I'm okay, all right? The wife and I got it, you know? She got it first and gave it to me. But these are minor details. I don't know why I'm sharing this right now. We talked with Allison about the cookbook. And here's the interesting thing. If you haven't gotten the Back to the Future cookbook, I suggest you go do so and kind of use this podcast as a look-along or a read-along with the book, because she breaks it down from the 1980s to the 1880s to the 1950s to the 2015s to the alternate 1980s. And there's some really good stuff in here that she kind of gave insight on the ideas behind the dishes. And I really enjoyed it. We did have at one point, I had her on via FaceTime audio, which I now have learned I probably won't do again. I like it because it has a little bit more of a clarity to it than, say, a regular landline or a phone call, but not as reliable. So there's a part where she was explaining her choices for the 1980s and the alternate 1980s, and how she ran into Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, and the inspiration for the Biff character in the alternate 1985. She ran into him at some event, and that's when she started to cut out. So you'll hear a transition, and what that is I ended up just calling her on the phone, and we did the rest of the podcast like that. So just in case you were wondering, because there will be a part where I edit out as much as possible of it, but there are some choppy parts there around that story. But she saw Trump, and I think there was something to do with paparazzi or whatever. It was a long time ago, so just bear with me, okay? And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this podcast. Make sure you give it a 5-star rating and review. I actually do read those reviews quite often on the Apple Podcasts. And if you have a review on there and I read it on the show, I'm going to send you a book in the mail. I've done it with a few people already. They can attest to it. It happens. I do it for real. For real, I do it. So I'm going to type in right now and see if there's any recent ones. I should have probably done this before doing the show. Let's see. Do we have a recent review? We do, from Wednesday. Was listening to Talk is Jericho the other day and found his episode interviewing Brad about his book and all this. It's awesome, and I am now listening to them all. That is from Iron Man 1986. Well, Iron Man 1986, if you are listening to this right now, shout out to you. Shout out to Chris Jericho. Slide in me DMs, my brother, on Twitter. I'm at Brad Gilmore, and I will send you an autographed copy of Back from the Future, a celebration of the greatest time travel story ever told, available in hardcover, paperback, and audio edition. You can get the audio CD. You can get it on Audible. read by my man Joe Hempel, who I need to talk to on this podcast. Joe, if you're listening, I owe you a spot on this show. Without further ado, let's get to my interview with the author of the Back to the Future, the official Hill Valley Cookbook, the incomparable, the greatest texter of all time, Allison Robicelli. And she joins me right now from the great city of Baltimore, Maryland. She is the author of Back to the Future, the official Hill Valley Cookbook. Allison Robicelli joins us on the show. Allison, how are you?
I'm doing good, Brad. Excited to be here.
You know, this is a long time in the making. For people listening, we have been trying this for, I don't know how long it was until I first reached out to you, but I feel like we were in the midst of the pandemic. Does that sound right?
You know, what is the pandemic and what isn't the pandemic at this point? Like, time is a flat circle, Brad.
Well, you know what? Time is an apropos conversation to have today because we're going to be talking about Back to the Future. Of course, we're going to be talking about your cookbook, which I'm holding right now in my hands. And I want to run through some of the things in it, kind of the process of it. But let's talk about you for a little bit. For people who don't know, I mean, obviously, you have a background in food. You have a background in writing. You're a James Beard Foundation Award-nominated writer, which is something that I'm sure you hold near and dear. Give us a little bit of background kind of on what led you to writing and then what kind of led up to this book.
Well, I started my career in my hometown in New York City, working as a chef and in catering. And then I opened up a gourmet shop with my husband that evolved into a bakery. And for our website, like our flavors and specials would change every day. And I would write about it very professionally on our little Tumblr blog, you know, back in like 2008. And everything was like, you know, pitch perfect and sunshiny and whatever. But as the bakery got more successful, my hours got later and later and later. And again, I am from Brooklyn, New York. I have the mouth of a truck driver. So the later it got, the less of a filter I was able to have. It takes a lot for me to, you know, put the filter on. So everything just started getting really like the way I talked, which is obscene and like a smart ass, and people loved it, and which was good because I wasn't stopping. I was still tired, and it wasn't going back. And the Tumblr just became really popular in New York, and I started getting asked to guest write for websites and contribute to books, and the bakery it was called Robicelli's Bakery, became very famous in New York till we closed in 2015. So then I got an opportunity to write my first book for Penguin. It's called Robicelli's A Love Story with Cupcakes, and it's a cookbook memoir, came out in 2013. And yeah, I just kind of fell in love with writing, you know, because there wasn't a lot of humor. I'm a comedy writer, like kind of by nature. I written humorous essays for before I became a chef, and that was always interesting to me. And there wasn't a lot of it in food, so I kind of had this little niche. And then when the bakery closed, I decided to start pursuing writing full time. I just moved to Baltimore. I had 2 young kids, and writing is owning a small business is terrible. If you're out there thinking about opening up a small business, do not do it. If you like baking, stay home and bake. If you like having panic attacks and doing invoices, then you can own a bakery. But I was like, I got out in the bakery and I'm like, I never want to go anywhere again, and I never want to talk to people ever again. So writing is the way to go. And my career, like it took off. I want to say it took off rapidly because I'd been doing it for like 8-9 years at that point. But it was just like a really great fit for me. And then a couple of years ago, I ended up moving to The Onion, which had a food site under it called The Takeout. And I wrote for The Takeout for about 2.5 years. And while this was happening, I got the opportunity to write a wonderful book about Baltimore called 111 Places in Baltimore You Must Not Miss. It's a travel and history book. And I am a huge, huge history nerd. So when I got the chance to write that, I jumped at it because Baltimore is like, if you love American history, this is the place. That's one of the reasons I actually moved here, because I love the history so much. And then, hold on one moment.
Yeah.
Sorry. You have one job. I'm on a podcast. One job. Tonight? One job. Okay, hold on. I apologize that messed you up.
No,
but again, I was telling you, I had 2 teenage boys downstairs, and they had one job, which was, Mom's recording a podcast. Do not talk to me. Do not contact me. And now they're calling me again. Oh, my God. Brad, you still there?
I'm here.
Okay. Because they not only, they said, I'm sorry, and then they hung up, and then they called me back. Because
Classic.
Why not?
Classic. That's classic
boys.
teenage hijinks.
Yes.
Is what that is.
Yes, so this is why I'm a writer, because I need to be full-time dealing with things like this. And this is also where the comedy comes from, I suppose. It's like, what doesn't kill me makes me funnier. And teenage boys are trying to kill me all the time. It's just, it's part of it. This house smells like farts and sweat and something I don't even know how to identify, but it's terrifying. Anyway, back to me. And then after writing this history book, I got an offer from Insight Editions, a publisher, to write the WWE Cookbook.
Yes,
and
another one I own.
Yeah, I hadn't watched wrestling in years. I was a fan when I was a kid, and I was like, this will really impress my children. And it was mostly to impress my children, and they weren't impressed. But the book is very good anyway. And after I wrote that, they were like, would you be interested in writing, they're like, we just got the license to Back to the Future. Would you? And I'm like, yes. I have seen this movie, all 3 of these movies, like 100 times. I like Back to the Future. I don't even know where to start with my love for that movie. Ever since I was a kid, I was born in 1980. And I must have seen it at least 70 to 100 times. I don't even know if it's ever on the television. I will drop everything I'm doing to watch it. They are perfect movies. And when I got to watch them again for the sake of this cookbook, of just watching it, I'm like, these are flawless movies. I don't see, I mean, there's not a single thing I would change. And very rarely is any movie like that. So yeah, they were like, do you want to write this cookbook? I'm like, absolutely, I do. And my former husband and chef partner, Matt, he wrote the recipes, and we came up with the construct of the book together. And I wrote the text, and we, taste tested everything together. And yeah, I got to write the Back to the Future cookbook. How cool is that? Like, I'm a super fangirl. I'm a super fangirl, and I, in some very small way, got to be a part of Back to the Future history or future. So, yeah, I love it, and I'm so happy I got to write this book.
Yeah, I mean, and I want to dive into the Back to the Future cookbook, but let's take a detour for just a moment, because there's 2 things I want to bring up. First off, the WWE cookbook is something I also own. My radio co-host here in Houston is Booker T, and I believe there was a Booker T inspired, was it a tea of some kind?
I believe there was an iced tea. I did not know about Booker T, but I hope he does like the iced tea. Yeah, Booker T was, yeah, I loved watching him when I did watch wrestling before I had kids. And, you think you watch more wrestling when you had boys, but it goes the opposite way, because that just causes damage. So I was like, we can never watch wrestling again. We did it once. There was a lot of property damage, a lot of screaming, several injuries. And I was like, this is the worst possible. Like, they should just show, like, wrestling to geriatric people. That's it. Like, if you are at home, you're allowed to watch wrestling. But nobody else can do it. We cannot be trusted.
Well, you got to give me, since you used to be a fan of wrestling back in the day, this is just on my own curiosity more than anything. Who your top 3 wrestlers of all time? Like who is Allison's go-to? China? Love
and
it.
China. That is it.
Oh my gosh, what a great top 3. That's a phenomenal top 3.
This is another reason why I can't watch wrestling. I'm like, I want justice for China. Like, I was just like, that is my girl. She amazed me when I was young. I, was like in my late teens when, what's it, like the whole, oh God, why am I blanking? Degeneration X came out,
right.
And she was just like, and, being a girl, obviously, like, in the Attitude Era, they were all something. Not great for women. We'll say it wasn't a great time for women in WWE.
High on sex appeal and things like that. Not so much anything else. Yeah.
Yes. But then, Chyna showed up and I was like, oh my God, she's wrestling men, and she was just a monster. And then when I got to write the book again and I went back and seeing like Becky Lynch and Sasha and, Alexis, and I was like, oh my God, this is getting real now. Like seeing Becky Lynch in a WrestleMania, like title match, that was unbelievable. Cause, it's, you can enjoy so much. Like I enjoyed stuff when like everybody else, but when you're a girl and you don't see yourself, and it's just not as much fun. And when you do see yourself, it's not even like you're sitting there waiting, like, God, I wish they would like let women wrestle more. You just don't even think that it's a thing. You're so used to it not being a thing. So when you see it and you're like, holy crap, that's somebody who looks like me, and she's as strong and as powerful and as feared as the guys, and there's nothing she can't do. And Chyna was just it for me. And I love every female wrestler who's come since. But oh my God, yeah, I loved that woman, and may she rest in peace.
Yeah, I'm with you. What an anomaly! What a phenomenal talent. I mean, and the thing is, even when she was in there with the men, wrestling the men, you never questioned it. Even me as a young fan watching, I never was like, oh, this is not believable. It was 100% bought in. She's a badass. She can kick your ass. All kinds of stuff like that. Just, she was awesome. She really was.
And you
awesome.
you got worried for everybody else, because it wasn't like she was a stunt and she wasn't going to kick your ass. She would destroy you, and you deserved it.
Right. Yes. Oh, Chon, that's such a great answer. I'm really, right now, you're like a 10 out of 10. And by the way, everybody listening right now, Allison is maybe my favorite person I've texted with who I don't know like really well. Like obviously we don't really know one another other than out of the context of this podcast, but like greatest texter of all time. Like seriously, you're like so.
You could also, if you can't text me, which most of you can't, Brad, you have special privileges.
I do.
But I'm on Twitter at Robicelli's ROBICELLIS, and Allison Robicelli on Instagram. And you could always hit me up there, and it'll kind of be like I'm texting you, but not really.
Well, it'll be less intimate and yes, obviously not as genuine, but you can still.
It'll be genuine. I respond to everybody. I'm like, I have amazing fans. I mean, it's so crazy to me that I have fans as a writer. But no, I love everybody who writes to me and stuff. But I mean, Brad, if I let everybody text me, you wouldn't be as special.
I know, and I'm really trying to hold on to the premium of my special abilities, and special privileges.
Well, that is, you were allowed to text me anytime in the future about any sort of claptrap, just for fun.
Okay, I appreciate it. One more thing to bring up before we dive into Back to the Future. You're a New York City native. I do love New York. I love the food in New York. Although, if I can tell you a story, I'm from, as we talked about earlier, I'm from the great state of Texas, and we hold a couple of food groups pretty near and dear to our heart, right? Barbecue is the one that everybody thinks of first, but also Mexican food, Tex-Mex is how we call it down here, right? Very big on it. So when I go anywhere, when I travel anywhere, my wife will tell you the first thing that I do is I look for the nearest Mexican food restaurant. I got to try it. I got to experience it. Now I'm thinking New York, hey, this is one of my first times out there. New York might have some pretty good Mexican food. I wasn't sure. And so I asked the cab driver, hey, best Mexican food in New York, where do I go? And he was stumped by the question. His suggestion was Chipotle, which I really, I didn't feel confident about that suggestion, so I didn't take it. So I go into Yelp, and the only place I could find that had good reviews was actually a place called Chips and Salsa. Now, the name didn't romance you a lot, but it kind of gave you like, hey, here's what we have. This is what we have to offer. And I will say, I did not love it. I did not love it though.
Yeah. I don't know what the hell that's all about. That is crazy. I mean, one, you guys have great Mexican food because you used to be Mexico.
It's true.
Texas was Mexico.
It's true.
So it's almost like Mex-Tex food. In New York, a lot of the Mexican immigrants are from the Puebla region of Mexico. Like Mexico, if you know anything about Mexican food, it is it is spectacular and it is varied. It is regional. It is complex. It is an unbelievable thing to research and learn about. It is so much more than tacos. It is just one of my favorite subjects to learn about. And just like in America, like Texas doesn't have the same food as like New York or Washington or California. Puebla doesn't have the same as what is like, in Texas. So whenever you go to New York City or any big city, just find out where all the immigrants are. Like in Chicago, I did not know that there was so much good Mexican food in Chicago. But there are neighborhoods where they're just, full of people who have moved from Mexico. And they have these, communities and they're cooking for themselves. So in New York City, like I grew up in Brooklyn next to a neighborhood called Sunset Park. And that is a very heavily Mexican neighborhood. Large swaths of Queens and the Bronx are filled with Mexican immigrants. And when you go to that neighborhood, you pretty much even the worst place is the best place. And that's the one thing I miss about living in New York. I don't miss anything. And I lived there from the day I was born till my 36th birthday. I don't miss a damn thing about it, but I miss the takeout because I was just so spoiled. Like, oh, I don't want to cook. I could like walk to 5 or 6 unbelievably best in the world kind of restaurants. And then another 20 restaurants. Like, it'll do. But in Baltimore, they have a lot of great restaurants, but just not as many that are close to my house. So New York City is a great place if you are hungry and lazy.
Well, there you go. Hungry and lazy. New York City's got it all. And I'm going to take up your advice because I'll be in New York at the time we're doing this weekend. So I'm going to try to find me a good Mexican food. I'm excited about it. But now let's talk Back to the Future. So you say you're a child of the 80s. And growing up, I'm sure in the 80s, this movie was probably like the biggest deal ever at the time. So you said you were 1980. So 1985 is when the first movie came out. So you were 5. Do you have early memories of that first movie? Did you go to the theater to see any of these? 5 might be a little too young to remember.
I didn't go to the theater, but I don't remember it being a phenomenon as much as just something that was part of the culture. Like, when you're 5 and you don't know anything and you're like, the sky is blue, the grass is green, and Back to the Future is a movie that everybody knows and loves. And I remember, having it on tape, like on a VHS, and watching it a lot at home. I remember I had a younger cousin, who was obsessed with that movie from the ages of 3 to 8. So anytime we were at my grandmother's house, we were watching that movie. And the thing is that's so special about Back to the Future is you can watch it 100 times and not get sick of it. It is actually impossible to get sick of that movie. In fact, I think the more you watch it, the dearer it becomes to you. So Back to the Future wasn't a movie. It was just, it was a part of the world. It was a part of life. Eat, sleep, watch Back to the Future. And then I remember when Back to the Future 2 came out, because I was in 4th grade, and that was such a big deal for everybody. And then I remember people complaining about it at the time, oh, it's not as good as the first one. And then the third one came out, which I thought was amazing. And then people were like, oh, did they mess up the trilogy? But here we are 30 some odd years later. And I think we could all admit, even when they're not the best, they're still the best movie. There is not Back to the Future 2 is incredible and oddly did kind of predict the future in a bizarre way.
Yeah, in several ways, right? In several ways, they got a lot of stuff wrong, like paying with your thumbprint, picture in picture. Robots in your house. I just saw this Amazon robot. This kind of freaked me out a little bit. So, I mean, they've got all stuff.
I was at a friend's house a couple of weeks ago, and he's got his projector on, and it's showing pictures of a lake. I'm like, you are watching the Scenery Channel. Oh, my God. And he's like, you're right, I am. And, we don't have the flying cars and the hoverboard, which is what everybody complains about. But the rest of the stuff we have is actually maybe better than a lot of the stuff in 2015. So, they did pretty good.
They should
have kept making Jawses, though. They kind of, I guess, I don't know if Back to the Future was the thing that killed Jaws, because there was like 7,000 Jaws, and then they were like, they're like, you know what? Maybe we should stop. Maybe we're not going to have Jaws like 5,000.
Yeah, let's not keep running. I mean, how many times is it? I mean, the Jaws series got a little silly whenever the shark would follow the family. It's like this shark knows the family now. Like, what are we doing?
Yes. I know. No. It's the 80s. Like the 80s, if a movie doesn't make sense, all you have to say is cocaine. Cocaine made this movie happen. And then suddenly it all comes together very clearly, and it's a much better movie to watch.
Hey, let's be honest, though. Cocaine made a lot of great movies in the 80s.
Cocaine made the 80s. I mean, seriously, just watch any movie and remember that everybody from the director to the screenwriter to the caterer is on cocaine, and everything makes so much more sense.
It does. It does make so much more sense. So obviously you're a fan of the films whenever you get the call to do the cookbook. But I guess here's my question. So you know these movies inside and out. You've seen them all 1,000 times. And for those of you who don't have the cookbook, it's really cool how it's laid out, because you have recipes that are kind of reminiscent of the 1880s, the 1950s, 2015, the 1980s, of course, the alternate 1980s, which I love. Talk to me kind of like, okay, you got the license to do the cookbook. It was kind of like when I went to my publisher and said, I want to do a book about Back to the Future. And then they said, okay, do it. I didn't really know what to do after that. Like, I just had the idea. You want me to write this thing? I mean, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
For they say, we want you to do Back to the Future. You agreed to it. Do you automatically have an idea, or like, what's the next step?
Well, the publisher has some sort of idea. It takes a lot of negotiation with the movie studio and permissions, and it was above my pay grade. And I'm old and wise enough to know, being like, I'm not going to get paid for this. This is a you problem. But we both had ideas together of what the book should look like. I love writing and revising retro recipes. Like I said before, I'm a history nut. So we wanted to, bring recipes from those times back to life. My ex Matt and I, we came up with tons and tons of ideas, and we gave it to them. And then, I don't even remember how many ideas we had, like hundreds. And then they went to the studio, and then they came back and they were like, these are the ones that they okayed. And I was like, fantastic. So the book starts in 1985. And we, tried to do stuff like a little bit true to the 80s. Like we have stuff in there that's directly pulled from the movie, like Uncle Joey's parole cake or denied parole cake. Yeah. But then, we did something with Pepsi Cola. It's not called Pepsi Cola because we can't use brand names, but oddly, Back to the Future was one of the first movies that went really big into product placement. So, we took stuff that we remembered from the 1980s. Then going back to the 1950s, which was pretty easy, creating a lot of things that, just fit in with like the family dinner table, the Baines family, the stuff that the meatloaf and things that they actually had in the movie, and ideas of things that they might have served at like the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. Then the Back to the Future 2 movie, that was a little bit more difficult because, as we know, 2015 in real life isn't exactly the same as 2015 in the movie. 2015 in the movie was much cooler. It's still that kind of like retro futuristic thing, like dehydrated pizzas and fruit that came from the ceiling. And even though we have like plenty of cool things around us, we didn't want it to be like avocado toast and foods that were in the real 2015. We wanted it to be like a little bit more surreal. So we came up with like instant ramen sort of bowl, like it's, you put stuff in a jar and then you pour hot water into it and boom, you have an incredible, ramen salad. Or we came up with little pizzas that they don't grow inside, like they dehydrate or rehydrate, but they do puff up into like pockets. We tried to have fun there where we could, as long as like the limits of space and time and physics would allow us. And then for alternate 1985, that was really fun. this is just like, it was during the Trump administration when we wrote the book, and there were a lot of parallels. And I was like, you know what? Let's just look up the menus from the Trump casinos in the 80s. And that's what we did. And those are all dishes we pulled from.
That is so hilarious. That is so funny.
Like 9 years old, like the Trump castle in Atlanta. And I met, or I saw him, and married to a guy, got run over by a bunch of paparazzi that were chasing her. And I'll just never forget that. Like, they used cool, and I almost got run over by a photographer, and I was like, who are these people, and what are they doing? Remember, even year-old girl, I'm like, this bad. Did really well. And then go 5, we pulled our base off of found in California. There are for modern palace, shoe leatherish. But yes, we based it on
Hey, Allison.
Authentic time travel experience. Yeah.
Hold on. You cut out there for a half second. So tell me about the 1880s again. I'm sorry.
5. We pulled from California, from newspapers and cookbooks in California, and we upped them because some that was very tough, or not necessarily the, but we reached them well, so you would have an authentic in your very own home.
Oh man, that's so awesome. I love the authenticity and the idea put into all of it. I mean, but for those who don't have the cookbook, there are, several dozen different recipes, and some pulled straight from the movie. I guess so. When you were watching the film, you and Matt watching through the movies, were you like, okay, look, we can do that. Like, there's Gerald Bird, Joey's cake. Okay, we're definitely going to do that. In the third one of my favorite things you have in here is the wake up juice, and that's actually something I used to think about as a kid. Like, what is in the wake up juice? How do you make the wake up juice? And now you have a recipe for that. So was that kind of part of the idea? As you would watch the movies and try to pull as much as you could from there before you start diving into the history books?
Yeah, no, as a fan, I want the things I see on the screen to be in the cookbook. I would actually be really disappointed if they weren't. So that was priority 1. And then you have all those things, and you're like, okay, so I have like a dozen recipes, and now I have to come up with like 100 more. But like I said, there's things in the background. We have in the 2015 part, when you're at Cafe 80s, like there's menu boards in the back. And you can overhear, the characters in the video screens reading the menu. So there's food in a lot of places you don't even, you're not even looking for it. Or like I said before, the Baines table. We all think about Marty or Calvin meeting the family and talking about the honeymooners, but you forget they're eating dinner. So we're like, what's on that table? And let's put it in the book.
Oh man, yeah, you're right. I mean, I guess if you went through the history of all film and you just looked at all the opportunities to grab food recipes, there's probably umpteenth millions out there that you could grab from. And it's funny because I guess, let me ask you, do you do that when you're watching any movie? Do you like look at the food and see what they're eating?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's like, this is work. I'm not going to do this. But sometimes, I will be like, I like kind of seeing what people in the back are doing in scenes anyway. Like the people who are like, they're not just standing there. They're doing little motions and stuff to make the scene come alive. So sometimes it's like really interesting to look back and they'll be like, oh, that man is eating a cookie. That man is, enjoying a scone while reading a newspaper. And, pick things up that way. And food it's a surprisingly accurate detail. Like the things that happen in those little scenes in the background, they are not just thrown in there. they are very deliberate. They're deliberate choices made by the actors and the directors and the screenwriters and the prop department. Somebody's there cooking it and styling it. So it's kind of nice when you do catch that thing to just, take a moment and appreciate all the people who made that background cookie happen.
Yeah, man, it's so awesome to think about. And what better way to also, because you talked about how Back to the Future was one of the first films to really use product placement. And one of the things Robert Zemeckis talked about, the director of the movie, talked about how you can show change of time with logos, because we live with these logos for decades, and you can see the change in time by looking at logos. So that's why you have Texaco or Pepsi Cola or whatever. Mm-hmm. But also, food is such a great time capsule, right? You can tell so much about a time period just based off what they're eating. Now, you're being a lover of history. Did you have to do a whole hell of a lot of research on the 1950s when writing those recipes and coming up with those ideas?
I didn't, but then I still did it anyway because I love it. And I was just like, I know all of this, but I still want to do it anyway. And, it's always great to see another different type of recipe for tuna noodle casserole. But, the 50s food tells a story of, this is a time where it's a post-war time, and industrialization is, it's changed the food landscape radically. It's changed the way people are working and jobs are happening in America, because, again, this is a response to World War II and all these factories that have been built and the GI Bill and new technologies. So the foods that you're getting, today we're like, TV dinners, tuna noodle casserole. But the reason that they loved it back then was because it was food of the future. So in a way, you're eating something futuristic in the past. So here's we go with our time as a flat circle thing again. It's like, where does the past end? It's future food to the people in 1885. And, and it does kind of tell the story about class and economics and the nuclear family, the story of suburban California, where you have these developments where you see people, the Twin Pines Mall going up and these tract houses. Same thing with the 1980s, the stuff that we did for alternate 1985. You have food that is all about indulgence and wealth and things that are over the top. Even though it was alternate 1985, the 80s were very much about that, especially in casinos. They wanted everything bigger and more glamorous. We're talking about Wolf of Wall Street sort of stuff. So your food is telling the story of the people, what was important to them, the types of means they had, the types of dreams that they had, the dreams that they were sold about the American promise, what they wanted from their lives. So it's a lot more than just food. It's a way to get into the characters and, honestly, a way to travel through time.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Wow, how beautifully said was that. Now the other thing I liked about the cookbook, there's a million things I could talk to you about just with the cookbook alone, but you have these great names for the recipes. Now, this might sound silly to you, and maybe these names came to you obviously, like Frisbee apple pie or Wake Up Juice. But I remember watching an interview with Jerry Seinfeld where he said when he was doing his series, he didn't want the writers to waste too much time coming up with clever names. That's why every Seinfeld episode is the puffy shirt or the mango or the ticket or whatever, right? The pilot. So these names, though, some of them are very clever, and I really just appreciate them. I appreciate the wit behind some of them. I appreciate the naming of them, but I'm also sure that sometimes you'd come up with a recipe and the name wasn't obvious to you. Can you just kind of tell me about the naming of the recipes?
Oh, that's a good question, because this happened so long ago. Especially when we're doing recipes that weren't featured in the movie, you wanted to have something kind of fun about it. Like, one of the reasons I loved writing this book and the WWE cookbook, and if you read some of my other writing, like my first cookbook, or I write food writing for the Washington Post and all sorts of other places, like I am a very, very good cook. I ain't too shabby, and I can write a proper fancy pants recipe. But these books, I think of them as like, this might be the first book a kid ever cooks from. You know, I think of like a 7-year-old kid in the kitchen with his mom and dad wanting to do something really fun. And that's like, even though some of the recipes are inspired by history or, you know, real life events, I want everything to be as fun as watching the movies is. You know, it's not that serious. So when there isn't a place for like a good name, we're like, let's come up with something silly. Even if it's like groaning, it either like, you know, it gives you like a little laugh or it gives you an emotional reaction, or it, you know, it makes part of the movie play back in your head, which is pretty cool. You know, you want to be thinking about the movie while you're making this stuff. So I'm not the best at puns. Matt was very good at puns. And my kids, unfortunately, got the pun thing from him. I'm not a fan, but I told them, I was like, listen, you guys do this together. And they came up with some hilarious names. And yeah, I like to think of like little kids just giggling over some of this stuff and making it for their parents or for their friends. And that's really, really special to me.
God, I love the thought that was put into this. Here's another question I have for you about the cookbook, and then I want to ask a few things about Back to the Future. But the wake up juice. Okay, for those of you, everyone listening to this podcast knows exactly what I'm talking about. Doc Brown has one shot of whiskey in 1885, knocks out, and the bartender says, we need to make some wake up juice, right? In this wake up juice, it's a very interesting concoction. So can you tell me like specifically about the creation of this, if you can recall, because you have.
Can you remind me what is in the wake up juice right now? Because I might have blocked this out.
I'm about to drop it on you because the ingredients list is very interesting to me. So we have 46-ounce can of tomato juice, a cup of dill pickle juice, 1 cup of horseradish, 1/8 of a cup of Worcestershire sauce. Say that 5 times fast. 2 tablespoons of fresh lemon juice. 1 tablespoon of celery salt, 1 tablespoon of cayenne pepper, 2 tablespoons of hot sauce, a big old glug of strong whiskey, and celery for garnish. So tell me, how many taste tests does this have to go through, if you can recall?
Fortunately for me, 0, because I am sober. So every time we have to do a cocktail in the book, somebody else like Matt would do it, or we get the neighbors involved. So we mix it up and be like, you drink this, or it's like, I got off the hook. But that recipe, essentially, it's a Bloody Mary turned up to 11. And one of the reasons Bloody Marys are so popular at brunch is because they're supposed hangover cures. That's how it started.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at a lot of these things, horseradish is clearing up your sinuses and getting rid of that like hangover headache. Hot sauce is waking you up and it's making your eyes water and getting all that congestion and fuzziness out. There's salt in there, and that helps you replenish your electrolytes, just like Gatorade does. Tomato juice has vitamins. So it's just a Bloody Mary with the spices and the flavors turned up like crazy. And of course, there's some whiskey in there. That's hair of the dog. It helps it go down a little bit easier. But yes, I this is the same in the WWE book when we would do cocktails. Mm-hmm. I'm like, somebody else can get shit-faced. I will sit here and take notes.
So how long have you been sober, if you don't mind my asking?
Oh, not at all. I have been sober a little bit over 7 years now, and I don't miss it one bit.
Oh, congratulations. That's awesome. Did you just feel like you've done it, you've been there, it's over?
Yeah, I'd struggled with alcohol when I was younger, like a teenager, your 20s, but like it's hard to get sober in your 20s because you give up alcohol, but then you also end up giving up your friends and your social life. And then I quit drinking when my first son was born, and I had stopped drinking for like 5 years. And then I was like, you know what, like I'm in the food industry. I get to go out a lot. People are always handing me drinks. I'm like, it's not that bad. And I'm not somebody who was like waking up and needing to drink all the time. But I found that when I start drinking, I can't stop. And even though I was in my 30s and more mature, I had not actually gotten mature. I was not in control of my drinking. And then one day I woke up and I had a terrible hangover that lasted 3 days. And I was like, you know what? This added nothing beneficial to my life. It actually made everything worse. It made me like get into a fight with my friends. It helped me. It cost me a ton of money. I feel sick. I have to call people and apologize for things I did. And I was like, what? Like, name one good thing that happened. And I had nothing. And I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to, I'm like, this is it. I'm like, I've been on and off the wagon for a couple of years. I'm just not doing this anymore. And, after that, when I was at the takeout, I actually got them to give me a weekly column on non-alcoholic beverages because there's so many good ones on the market. Like, it's not like back in the day when all we had was like O'Doul's that some bartender left near a water heater for 6 months. Like, there are genuinely great spirits and wines and beers being produced that are non-alcoholic. Like Athletic Brewing Company, if you're a beer drinker and you like craft beer, go check out Athletic Brewing. They are phenomenal. And we have all these great options now. So I'm trying to write about that more. And again, if you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, when I do have an article in places about such things, I link to it. And if you ever need a suggestion, hit me up on Twitter. I got lots of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's great. You know, I've never had a drop of alcohol my entire life, right? I've been sober my whole life.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Good for you.
But these non-alcoholic beverages, they do sound interesting to me. But one of the big things that have been a repellent of sorts for me when it comes to alcohol is everyone always talks about how bad it tastes. So can I find a good tasting non-alcoholic beverage? Is that a thing?
Yes. I mean, when you think about it, most of the liquids in the world don't have alcohol in them.
That's
and
true.
that was just always a crazy thing to me when I would talk to magazines and stuff about coverage and restaurants. They're like, nobody's going to buy it. I'm like, there are more drinks in the world than wine. Like, there's more fruits in the world than grapes. Yeah. But it's a very kind of like Eurocentric idea that we have, and everything was based on France and Italy and blah, 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 blah. But now people are starting to realize that, yeah, there are lots of phenomenal drinks out there and ways to enjoy yourself and have something delicious that don't involve. It's like, imagine if every food in the world had to have beef in it. That would be ridiculous. And then people say oh, well, I'm a bartender and I can't do anything. Well, you're not good at your job then. You can't be like, I have 1,000 fluids, but I can only mix the ones with booze in it. That is ridiculous. And people are finally realizing that is stupid. I was right the whole time.
You're always
You're welcome,
right,
America.
Thank
you.
Always
I was
right.
so many liquids. And there are some really good things out there. I mean, from artisan sodas to non-alcoholic beers to malt beverages. There's a lot of great hop waters out there. If you like kind of the crispness of hops from a light beer, a hop water is spectacularly delicious. And these things are a lot more grown up than just, sugary soda. You have stuff that's dry, you have stuff that's bitter. It's a fantastic, it's quite a time to be alive if you're a sober person. And this is the future that Doc Brown wanted for us.
It is.
It's a future of choices for all. So we don't have hoverboards. But we have good non-alcoholic tequila now. So
yeah, let's weigh our options here. I mean, come on. Do you want to just run around on a hoverboard and then get caught up in a hoverboard chase where you get arrested, right? Because you crashed the clock tower? Or do you want to have a non-alcoholic tequila?
Can you imagine being loaded on a hoverboard?
Oh
I can't imagine being sober on a hoverboard, and now you're going to put drunk people on it. This is why we're not allowed to have them, folks.
You're right.
Somebody working on them, and some assholes at the lab just got wasted and tried to hoverboard box or something, and there were probably lots of horrible brain injuries. And they're like, we need to stop this. This is just all lawsuits all the time. So sober up, and maybe we'll get those hoverboards.
Maybe we'll get the hoverboards. Let me ask a couple things on Back to the Future before we wrap up. You've been so generous with your time, and again, great follow on Twitter, Instagram. You don't have the special privileges to text her, but if you did, you would say she's a phenomenal texter as well. Back to the Future, 1, 2, 3. You say you love all the movies. Give me your order. How do we rank them? Because you seem to be a fan of film. You seem to be a fan of the pop culture, of the mania of it all, the history.
I feel like that's not fair. It's really not fair. I have 2 kids, and I'm not going to tell them I love one more than the other because I love them different. They're 2 amazing little guys, even though they're pains in the ass. But, I love each of them for precisely who they are. And without, I don't want I have an Atticus. I don't want another Atticus. And I have one Toby. I don't want another Toby. And Back to the Future 2 only works because Back to the Future 3 exists. And that only works because Back to the Future 1 exists. It's like, and that's what makes it such a good trilogy. Like, you could look at lots of other trilogies and be like, this is the best one, or this one has a weak point. But Back to the Future, every movie is in perfect balance with each other. Every movie matters. It balances each. It's like a math equation, and that's what makes it so masterful. You know, there's not a weak link. It's all part of one perfectly balanced unit.
So you're telling me something here, that you're telling me, one, you don't have a favorite child or a favorite Back to the Future film. This is what I just gathered.
That is what you gathered correctly, because after I watched 1, I'm like, well, I need to watch 2 and 3. And have you ever watched 3 and been like, gotta watch 1 and 2?
Yeah,
it's
100%.
Like they're exactly, like, you can't just take one of them on a desert island. It's all 3, or I'd rather die.
I feel like with 1, I could watch 1 by itself, but definitely if I watch 2, I have to put 3 on immediately. Like, I have to.
Exactly. Well, they're meant to be together, and 1 might get the edge because Huey Lewis is in it.
Right.
And I don't know who's listening to this podcast, but here's a fun fact. Huey Lewis is well known for having one of the largest penises in all of rock and roll.
Wow.
I mean, I found that out, and I was like, you don't expect it from Huey Lewis, but I respect it.
You don't expect it, but you have to respect it. Who knew?
Yep.
Because really, you only ever hear about Tommy Lee's. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But he's apparently bigger than Tommy Lee.
Whoa.
And you're like, God, be good for you, Huey Lewis.
So that's who the News was. Like he was Huey Lewis and the News. We thought it was the band, but he named his Johnson the News.
The band named themselves after Huey Lewis's wang.
Yes.
They respect it. They were like, that is a trade, and, you know, we don't need no credit card to ride that train right there.
We don't. We don't. Oh, my goodness. That is an interesting fun fact. I do appreciate knowing that about Sir Huey Lewis. It's why he could sing the way that he can.
And make everybody's life better. Yes. You know, and that's why I always think it's kind of funny when people will, like, sleep on Huey Lewis or not give him the credit he deserves. I've heard people say, like, it was like a glorified wedding band. And you do not say that about Huey Lewis. And B, Huey Lewis has a big dick, bigger dick than everybody put together. So y'all could shut the hell up about Huey Lewis. That man deserves your respect and admiration.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. Love it. Love it. Okay. Love Huey Lewis. Love everything you just told me about him. You don't have a favorite Back to the Future film, but let me ask you this. Do you have a favorite character in Back to the Future? A lot of people flock to Marty McFly. I'm sure he was a teen heartthrob of your generation, right? I've always been preferential to Christopher Lloyd, Doc Brown. Just love him.
Yeah.
Also, Mayor Goldie Wilson.
Mayor Goldie Wilson. That's a good choice. Yeah, Goldie Wilson. Wow, that is a good choice. I love George McFly. The first one, I mean, you definitely covered the Crispin Glover rule. But Crispin Glover, just the heart that he put into George McFly. And George McFly was just such a beautiful, delicate man, you know, and it did feel like kind of so real and so sympathetic. And, you know, again, looking at the dichotomy that you can have men on Earth like Biff and Biff's friends. And, you know, those are the guys that always get attention because they're always loud and obnoxious. And, you know, when you're like, I mean, we all have seen the internet. When you're a bad guy, more people listen to you when you're a jerk than if you're a good person. But then you look at somebody like George and you realize, like, yeah, there are really good men out there who exist. And as a mom of boys, that means a lot to me. To see, like, good, kind, sensitive boys that are essentially the opposite of a person like this and the person that you don't want your sons to be. So to know that he was like that, and then to see him so successful at the end, you know, and to see the kind boy one, the good guy, the guy who treated this woman so well, and he was creative and he was smart, and you know, it's a great lesson for young guys, and it'll help you do well with the ladies too. Yeah,
man, George Fly, and you know what? 85 Crispin Glover was a looker. Like he's
Oh my
he's
God,
a
yeah.
handsome dude.
He was handsome, but it was just, he had such a tenderness
Yeah.
about him. It would be so, like, when you hear a line like, "You're my density," and it's silly and it's jokey, but it kind of melts your heart in a way. Or, I mean, at least for me as a girl, like, you listen to that and I'm older, and I guess, when you're 16 years old, you go for the bad guys and you make dumb decisions, but then you're older and you're like, that is a man. That is a good man. That is a man that melts your heart, and that, Lorraine was very, very, very lucky to end up with.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, even in that scene, you can kind of see when he says that, she almost has that endearing look on her face, like, "Oh wow, like you're so cute." Wow, yeah, that tenderness came through to her even. And then
there's something sexy about a guy being pathetic. Like, there really
We've really covered the spectrums, like sexy, pathetic guys and rock stars with huge hogs. Like we've really gone through the emotions here. Yes.
I told you I was a good time. I warned you about this before we start recording. I bring it.
You sure did. Now, I feel as though I already know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case you surprise me, because I think you'll have a very specific answer. If you had the DeLorean time machine, I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. We know that it can go anywhere. It can travel through time. We can go front. We can go back, future, past, wherever. Where's Allison going? Why is she going there?
I have to go in the future because I'm a woman, and going back into the past would be a very bad thing for me. I have a lot of ideas of what I'd like to do back in the past, but I'm not going to be allowed to do any of them. And that'll make me angry. I'm going to punch somebody, and then I end up in prison. So I already know how that ends. It wipes out all of history. But you know what? Maybe I'll go into the future, or maybe I'll say, you know what? I've seen enough time travel movies that I want nothing to do with this. I would get in and hope somebody else took it, and then I could blame them if anything happens, because I don't want that kind of responsibility.
You don't want the fate of the space-time continuum to fall on your shoulders, is what you're saying.
Exactly. It's like, if something goes wrong, it's the other guy's fault. I just need to have a clean conscience. So I could, we could be hanging out before. I could be like, man, I wonder what it'll look like 100 years in the future. But I ain't touching crap when I get into that car. I'm just going to be like, I'm sitting there like, oh, no, how did we get here? And this way, nothing is my fault.
Nothing is your fault. Feels good. Yes. Yeah. You know what? See, you did surprise me. I thought with you being a history buff, you were going to go back to the past and like check out something.
I have thought about this, and then I just realized, wait, no, I'm a woman. I can't do this. So
I know
that's unfortunate for me. But Brad, if you get a time machine, you go wild with that thing. You enjoy that past for women and for African Americans and for everybody who does not have the freedom to travel through time.
See, another thing, I have to execute my privilege, even in time travel. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I have to check it sometimes.
Exactly. Like when you realize that, you're like, oh, wow. So it's a really good time to be a white man if you have a time machine.
Oh man. Yeah, and sometimes I do feel like that we lived in that alternate 1985, but we're living through it right now,
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. Like when we were going back and writing this book, it was like, we're watching that movie over and over again, and we're like, you got to be kidding me. Like, really? Like, really? This is happening? Like, wow. It was just, there are some parts you look back and you're like, that was really on the nose in a very crazy way. And you remember when you're like in 1989, you're watching it and be like, who would ever put up with that malarkey in the real world? Well, it turns out everybody. So
I know. I mean, and Bob Gale, co-creator of Back to the Future, said that the alternate Biff, or Biff in general, was based on the 45th president in some ways. The look and the attitude,
the hair, the attitude, the swagger. Yeah. Yes, he was. So yeah, it just kind of like, we didn't get Jaws, we didn't get hoverboards, but we got that. So take that as you will, America.
Biff became president. I mean, hey, they predicted everything. It's been such a lovely chat. I feel like we could do more, but you know what? Like, you leave on a high note. I'm sure, as you know, we leave on a high note. And Allison, it's been a pleasure. Let the people know where they can find you, follow you, plug the Instagram. I know you have a Substack as well, I believe.
Yes. Okay. Well, on Twitter, I am Robicelli. You can just look up my name, Allison Robicelli. I'm Allison Robicelli on Instagram. On Substack, this is a very hard project to explain, but I write a serialized, erotic, food-based soap opera. It's like 50 Shades of Grey meets Twin Peaks meets Days of Our Lives meets Lethal Weapon, and it also has recipes and hardcore sex scenes. And I know none of those words make sense, but when you read it, it totally makes sense. And that is at lakenipples.substack.com. And you know what? I'm just not going to explain what Lake Nipples is all about. I'll let you people imagine it and figure it out.
If your curiosity has not been raised by hearing that description, I do not know what will get you to subscribe to a Substack, because that's the greatest pitch I've ever heard in the history of my life. Allison, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm glad we finally got to do this. Again, the book is Back to the Future, the official Hill Valley Cookbook. You have recipes in here for multiple decades, all of them who've been covered in the Back to the Future films. Are we working on another cookbook? Do we have something coming out soon that we should know about?
I'm working on a proposal, but nothing just yet. Most now, like Lake Nipples is my baby. So I'm all in Lake Nipples. You can come see me there, and hopefully I will maybe one day write a Lake Nipples cookbook. Who knows? Maybe there will be a Lake Nipples movie. God, I hope not, but it could happen.
Well, we'll have to wait in suspense and find out. This has been a podcast for the ages. We've learned about so much about food, about your writing process, and of course about the news, about Huey Lewis. Allison Robicelli, thank you so much for joining us on Back to the Future, the podcast.
Thank you so much, Brad. It was a delight.
I mean, come on now, guys. What a fun ride that was. Allison Robicelli is incredible. She is incomparable. That means you cannot compare her to any guest that we've definitely had here on Back to the Future, the podcast. And we appreciate her taking the time out of her busy schedule. Make sure you support everything that she's doing. Make sure you go buy that Back to the Future cookbook. Buy the WWE cookbook, too, because it has a recipe for Booker T in it. I think it was like Long Island Booker T or something like that. Whatever it is, you should go do it, because Booker and I have a really great podcast called The Hall of Fame that you should check out from ESPN Radio. But that's neither here nor there. This is the only podcast looking back in time at the greatest film trilogy of all time. We have a really exciting time capsule next week. One of the first times I've done this. So until next week, I'm your friend in time, Brad Gilmore, and I will see you in the future.